presentation, Dr. Duncan later on, and another member will come on and give you the formal introduction. But at this point, we're just welcome you, glad to have you here, all the way from, I believe you're in New York. So we're pleased to have your presence. And we do have some regular Kiwanis activities before we get into your presentation, but I hope that you stay with us and that you enjoy what Kiwanis is about, and it will add context to your presentation later on. At this point also, I'd like to mention a few Kiwanis activities that the club itself is involved in, just for information for all our members. First of all, this week is Builders Club Week. So that's starting yesterday, Monday, February 24th through the 28th. We'll have a number of Builders Club activities, which are celebrating Builders Club in Kiwanis. So here you listen and you'll hear more about that. Also, CKI, we're going to be having their annual district conference. That's Kiwanis International for CKI. We'll be at Cardiff Hall from March 7th to 9th. And we will have our own representative, who is Kiwanian Ray J. Thompson, who also is interim chairman for the Builders for CKI, will be attending the conference on our behalf at Cardiff Hall in Runaway Base. So we wish him all the best on that conference, and I'm sure he'll be sharing some of the things that come out of that discussion. Some of you Kiwanians would be aware that we had the Kiwanis International President, Lee Kwan Young, who was here for the past 4 days. I believe he returns this evening, the 25th, but he was part of a number of activities, including the musical telethon that was on Saturday night. And one of the main activities was the chartering of a new club, Global Alliance, where a number of our members, including DLG Willie, DP Newton, and others were all attending. I don't have all of the members, but I know we had a strong contingent at that event, as well as the telethon and a number of the activities which involved the Kiwanis International President. And finally, and most exciting, I want to share with our club members that we will be chartering a K Kids Club, that it was going to be the K Kids Club of New Hope Preparatory, along with our co-sponsor, which is the Kiwanis, the Key Club of Kingston College, Fortis, the New Hope Preparatory, which is based on 56 St. James Street. So that's literally across the road from Kingston College. And that's going to be this Thursday at 12:30. So if anybody's interested in participating in that event, where our club is actually chartering a brand new K Kids Club, this Thursday at 12:30 at New Hope Preparatory. You can get in touch with myself or DLG Willie to find out more information about how you can be part of that event. So those are all of the activities. As you can imagine, our club is very active and very busy for the month. And we continue to celebrate, as we mentioned earlier, Black History Month, Reggae Month, as well as just trying to do service to others, especially the children in our society. So on that note, I'd like to move now to our welcome and introductions. And we do have with us DP Newton, who is going to now welcome our guests and visitors and Kiwanians who are here with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Thank you, President Stephen. Thank you. I just made it. Traffic out there is terrible.
Yes.
If I might, President Stephen, I know sometimes we get a bit confused with those two schools on North Street. I think New Hope is across from George's, not KC.
You are correct. I misspoke. Because I know a Key Club of KC was involved. But it is in fact across the road from St. George's College, STGC.
Right. I know you know where it is, because you and I have been there recently when they were having something. So I know it's just a confusion between those two.
Yes, good call.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This evening, again, another special evening, and we have a great guest speaker lineup, a lot of educational stuff, and I hope we have a lot of SLPs online with us this evening. So I'm going to start our recognition of persons online with any club, any Kiwanis club outside of Jamaica. Do we have any? Kiwanis Club outside of Jamaica with us this afternoon? Okay, well, moving. Do we have any Kiwanis Club in Division 25 with us this evening? Anyone from Division 25? Okay, well, we are going to move on then to Division 24. Do we have anyone from Division 24 with us this evening?
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. This is Director Crystal Heaven from the Kiwanis Club of Montego Bay. We have 3 persons on so far. Looking forward to a wonderful meeting. And thanks for the help out, DP Newton.
No problem, Director Crystal. And as usual, always happy to have you on your delegation with us.
Okay, DP. Thank you.
Any club from Division 24 with us this evening? No? All right. As I said, we're moving fast this evening. So how about Division 23 East? Do we have any member of Kiwanian from Division 23 East with us this evening? No? All right, well, let's move to Division 23 West. Do we have any club from Division 23 West with us this afternoon? Okay, well, let's bring it home now. Division 23 Central. Do we have any club from Division 23 Central with us?
PD Newton, good evening. Thank you for the invite. This is DP Paulette, Kiwanis Club of Friends Across Borders. We're very happy to be here. And we know that it is an interesting topic. We always want to hear. This evening, the delegation is 2 at the moment, but others are on their way.
Thank you, DP Paulette. Always glad to have you on your delegation here. And I tell you, I must admit, this is one of the presentations that I'm going to be listening to with pen and paper on hand. Because it is going to be, I know it's going to be one of the most educational that we have had in some time. And you know, we have had some really good ones.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. All right. Before I move on to SLP, is there any other Kiwanis club online that wants to let us know that you're here? Please just open your microphone and let us know before I move on to SLPs.
Kiwanis Club of West St. Andrew, DP Newton, always a privilege to join. And of course, this evening is even more special with the presentation that you have on hand. There are 2 of us on the meeting just now. I'm sure our delegation will be much stronger in a couple of minutes. Have a good meeting.
Okay, I thank you for joining us. And I am pretty sure I can hear Robert running to get to his laptop right now.
He's already here.
He's already
on the
there.
meeting.
Okay. Thank you for joining us as usual.
Yes, boss, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
sir.
here, my boss. I'm here.
Okay.
Hello, good evening, DP Newton. How are you?
Hi, President Dr. Eurydice. How are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Congratulations on being DP.
Thank you. That year was a very pleasurable one. I don't know what people were complaining about.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you so much for the invite. And at this time, we have a delegation of 2. And I look forward to this discussion. Thanks.
Okay. And thank you and your delegation for joining as usual.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other Kiwanis club before I go on to SLPs?
Yes, thank you. I, DP Newton. This is Audrey Brown, LGD, from the Kiwanis Club of New Kingston. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. There are 2 of us online, DLG Gerthlin and myself, hoping others will join a little later. Looking forward to the great presentation. Oh, 3, and Larice. Yes, thank you so much, Brownie. Looking forward to the presentation ahead.
Thank you, LGD, Audrey. To tell you the truth, I was just about to send out somebody to go check on DLG Gertlin because I couldn't understand why I didn't see her.
She's very much here.
Okay. Thank you and your delegation for joining as usual.
Welcome.
Any other club? Any other Kiwanis club? Okay, what about SLPs? Do we have any SLP with us? I hope we have a couple of SLPs with us because this evening is more so for them. Any SLP? Art, what about visitors? Do we have any visitors with us this afternoon? Whether you were invited by a Kiwanian, a Kiwanis club, or you just heard about us and decided to visit with us this evening. Any visitor?
I'm a visitor. Thank you for having me.
Hey, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Rob Allegre, and I'm a professor of Latin American history at the University of New England in Maine.
Okay, Professor, it's great to have you. And please remember, we do this every week, same time. I think the login is the same, and we will always welcome you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm a visitor.
Hi.
My name is Amina.
Okay. I recognize your face. You're no visitor.
Cleo advised me of this meeting.
Okay, great.
I'm happy to be here. Good evening, everyone.
Whoa, I see we have some high-powered people in our audience this evening. All right, great. Nice to have you, Amina.
Thank you.
DP Newton, I'm on, and I'm sorry. I just came off a meeting. Hi, I'm Amina, and it is great to join your meeting. I heard you mention my name, and I know LGD Audrey's on. I'm not seeing the other persons, but I know if they're not hearing me right now, they will be joining. So have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, DLG Gertlin. And LGD Audrey did come on and introduce. So it's
maybe
great.
I was still on my meeting. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
Oh, but it's always great to hear your voice.
Oh, thank you so much.
Nice to have you.
Hi, President.
Hi, DLG Gertlin. Welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have no SLPs. I hope some SLPs will join us before we end. Other than that, the president will tell you that we do tape these presentations, and I'm pretty sure it will be a good lesson for a lot of them. So once again, let me thank all who have joined us this evening. We are very grateful. Hello? We are very grateful for your oh, sorry, I don't know why my phone just logged on. Okay. We're very grateful that you have decided to spend the afternoon with us. And at this point, I'm going to return to President Stephen.
Thank you, DP Newton. Don't go far, as we do have birthdays coming up. So in terms of apologies for absence, we do have DLG Willie, VP Zuri had indicated that he's unable to attend. So the regular Sarge is not here, but we do have a capable replacement for him. Is there any other apologies that you have recorded?
Of course, we all apologize for the absence of our treasurer, Aubrey Lewis, who is in Cayman Islands.
Right. Okay. If there's no other apologies, we're going to move straight back into birthdays and anniversaries. DP Newton, do you have anybody on the list for this week?
Yes, Pres. We have 3 members of our club who are celebrating birthdays this week. First is Kiwanian Roy Curtis, who celebrates today, the 25th of February. Then on the 28th, we have Kiwanian Windsor Sawyer. And also on that very day, DP Dalma James celebrates his birthday. So Kiwanian Windsor Sawyer and DP Dalma James on the 28th of February, Kiwanian Roy Curtis on February 25th. And I'm going to ask if there's anyone online now who is celebrating a birthday, an anniversary, some special occasion. We do this all the while. We ask you to just open your microphone, share with us so we can celebrate with you. Is there anyone? No? All right. Well, President Stephen, it is back to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, DP Newton. As you heard at the beginning of the meeting, I mentioned that this week is also Builders Club Week with Kiwanis International. And we thought it would be appropriate for Kiwanis Education to speak a little bit about Builders Club and what they're about. And we have none other than our club secretary, DLG Willie, who will now give us a few nuggets of information on the Kiwanis education. Over to you, DLG Willie.
Thank you, President Stephen. Of course, we all know that Builders Club is part of our service leadership program found in our Kiwanis Club. But today specifically, I'm going to just mention Builders Club Week because this is what we're celebrating this week from the 24th to the 28th. Builders Club Week gives members the opportunity to show their community what Builders Club is truly about, service. Each day during this week places the emphasis on service to promote Builders Club within homes, schools, and committees, and to make Builders Club's household home. Yesterday was Show Your Kiwanis Pride. Today, Kudos to the Helpers. Tomorrow, Builders Club Celebrate Share with Passion. On Thursday, Random Acts of Kindness. And on Friday, all come together and connect the Kiwanis family. One of the programs that Kiwanis Club of Kingston is very proud of is our Terrific Kids program, which was launched last week at Lanneman's Preparatory on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, we were at Richmond Park. Terrific Kids is a student recognition program that promotes development, self-esteem, and perseverance. Terrific is an acronym for thoughtfulness, enthusiastic, respectful, responsible, inclusive, friendly, inquisitive, and capable. Students work with the classroom teacher to establish goals to improve behavior, peer relationships, attendance, or schoolwork. All students who achieve their goals after a specified time are recognized as Terrific Kids. Recognition includes receiving a pin as a Terrific Kid, some other means of recognition, food item possibly, and presentation of certificates and other giveaways. Kiwanis clubs provide financial sponsorship for the program and help to plan and develop their recognition ceremony. Another program we find in Builders Club in Jamaica is the Bring Up Grades, what we call the BUG program. Bring Up Grades, or BUG, is designed to provide recognition to students who raise their grades into an acceptable range and then maintain or continue to raise them from one grading period to the next. Recognition includes placement on the school BUG honor roll and presentations of certificates and buttons. Kiwanis Club provide financial sponsorship for the program and help to plan and develop the recognition ceremony. That, fellow Kiwanis, is a brief Kiwanis education on our Builders Club. Thanks for listening. Over to you, President.
Thank you very much, DLG Willie. And I hope those Kiwanians who can will celebrate Builders Club Week in some shape or form in recognition of the children and the faculty advisors and the parents who are active part of this program throughout Kiwanis. Okay, so on that note, we're now going to move into our main event or feature attraction, Dr. Duncan and her presentation. But in order to properly welcome her, I'm going to invite PDT Ralston, who is now on camera, to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. Over to you, PDT Ralston.
Thank you, President. Good afternoon, fellow Q audience and guests. Permit me to acknowledge a strong Jamaican Black woman who is with us this evening. And it's not Gertrude I'm speaking of. We know her already. But Amina Blackwood Meeks, we have to recognize her whenever we see her. And so we want to welcome her.
Thank you.
Well, it's not a task. My duty is to introduce Miss NATANYA Duncan, who is the Director of Africana Studies and Research Institute at the Queen's College City University of New York. She's also an Associate Professor of History. A renowned historian of the African diaspora, her research and teaching focus on global freedom movements of the 20th and 21st centuries. Her research interests includes constructions of identity and nation building amongst women of color, migration, color and class in diasporic communities, and the engagement of intellectuals throughout the African diaspora. Her book, An Efficient Womanhood, subtitled Women and the Making of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, focuses on the distinct activist strategies enacted by women in the Universal Negro Improvement Facility Association, which Duncan calls An Efficient Womanhood. Now, following how women in the UNIA scripted their own understanding of Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, and construction of diasporic Blackness. Her work traces the blending of nationalist and gendered concern amongst known and lesser known Garveyite women. Her publication include works that explore the leadership models of UNIA women and include Now in Charge of the American Field. Also, it's a Journal of Liberty Hall, Volume 3. She wrote also The Lady of the Race. And you see, all her works are really centered around Blackness and Pan-Africanism. And so it is very, very privileged for us to have her with us this afternoon, or this evening rather, to share with us of her vast experience and knowledge. A strong, strong woman of intellect. And I know that you're all anxiously waiting to see what she has to impart on us. And hopefully will leave something for us to not only contribute to the fight, especially at a time when we see what is happening in our neighbors to the north, where indeed we have set back quite a bit and we are under attack. So it's very interesting that we are having this evening. And so I want you to join me in welcoming our guest speaker for the evening. And we will sit back and listen to knowledge from NATANYA Duncan. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome and that beautiful introduction. I take it that everyone is able to hear me well at this time?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I am going to attempt to share my screen and see how that works for us. Okay, is everyone able to see well and clearly?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Fantastic. I'm also logged on from my laptop so that I can follow along in the chat, and I will attempt to read questions and comments as they come so that I'll be able to respond in kind in real time and not give the impression that I'm simply talking and ignoring you. I'd like to thank the Kiwanis Club for having me. I consider this to be a true honor and a privilege, and I am just delighted. Good evening to Mrs. Blackwood Meeks, and thank you so much for being here. I am really overjoyed to see you on the Zoom. This evening, I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you from my current book, An Efficient Womanhood, Women and the Making of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And the term efficient womanhood, I'd like to start us off with an understanding of what I mean by that phrase and how I came about it. In 1919, in an address at Liberty Hall in Harlem, New York, a law student by the name of Hannah Nichols participated in a discussion that focused on concerns around the increased number of lynchings of Black men who had returned from World War I. There was also a concern about the ways in which British regiment soldiers were being treated by the Empire after their service once they returned to the Caribbean and to England. And in that speech, she called upon women to take a more active role in helping to defend the rights and bodies of Black men. According to Hannah Nichols, we are called to action just as men are called. There can be no dormant spaces in our homes, work, or leisure. We must present an efficient womanhood ready to answer the call for equality and justice at home and abroad. A womanhood that is undaunted by anyone's objections in the pursuit of an independent Black nation. Now, many of you may be familiar with the Universal Negro Improvement Association that was started in Kingston, Jamaica in 1914 on the front porch of Amy Ashwood Garvey's parents. She and Marcus Garvey, at the end of what I call a day date, came to agree with one another that there was a need in their community, in their immediate community, and in the Black community at large, for an organization that was going to help address some of the employment issues, some of the socioeconomic and education issues that plagued Black people. At the end of that day date meeting, Mr. Garvey named Amy Ashwood secretary of the organization, and Miss Ashwood named Mr. Garvey president of the organization. Subsequently, the organization got its real start when Amy Ashwood borrowed money from her mother's purse to print flyers for the initial meeting of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. In that moment, Amy Ashwood served as Marcus Garvey's partner in helping to build the Universal Negro Improvement Association. She also helped to co-author the Constitution and the aims and objectives of the organization. I mention this particularly, as many of you know, the two would marry in 1919 and later on divorce by 1920. They had what we call the typical 5-minute marriage. Lovely love affair, hot and heavy and passionate for one another, apparently, but things just didn't seem to work out. But in their time together, the Constitution of the Universal Negro Improvement Association came to be a very unique and particular document for the period. The Constitution of the UNIA called for one member, one vote, which meant that women who were in good dues-paying status had the right to vote and run for office of their choosing, in as much as they could access the same offices that men could. Now, additionally, the Constitution of the UNIA also created a women's auxiliary. Now, many people read that as a sort of gendered, the women stay to one side, the men stay to another side kind of thing, sort of what we call in academia separate spheres. Women have a certain job, a certain role, so they stay in their corner and discuss it, and men have a certain job, a certain role, so they stay on their side and discuss it. However, in the UNIA, that wasn't the intention. In fact, in order to become a chartered branch or division, you would have to first show that you had enough women ready to serve in the office as president, vice president, as secretary, and treasurer of that particular branch or division before your charter application could be considered. So the concept of partnership was actually built into the constitution of the organization. Why is this significant? Women were voting and running for office in the UNIA at a time when women in so-called Western, modern, progressive countries like the United States, Great Britain, Spain, and France had not yet achieved suffrage. They had not yet achieved the right to vote. So in many ways, the particular practice of politics and strategies that go with politics were already being ferreted out in 1914, 1915, 1916, 6 and 7 years before white women become enfranchised, point blank. Now, this is important for us to understand because the efficient womanhood activist strategy that these women engaged in was built on this concept of partnering with like-minded women and men, serving as collective individuals or bridge builders in their communities. And what we mean by that is simply that these are women who decide to stand in the gap. When they see that there is a need to be met, there isn't necessarily a meeting of the minds or an application to a headquarters or any long conversation. It's, for example, the creation of Saturday schools by the UNIA's New York Garvey Club, which was established by Ethel Collins. Miss Collins was a native of Brownstown, St. Anne, Jamaica. She helped develop a curriculum for the UNIA Juvenile Cadet Corps that was Afrocentric in the sense that it made sure that the students understood, or the young people understood, the different facets of the continent of Africa and the relationship of the Caribbean nations, the United States, and Europe to Africa, very much so concerned with helping the students understand the topography, geography, independence movements, etc., of the continent. And then at the same time, the Juvenile Cadet Corps, which was started by Miss Collins and the Garvey Clubs, also fashioned themselves as ensuring the Garvey legacy and ensuring that the progeny of the UNIA would continue by replicating with young people the organizational structure of a UNIA branch. That meant that the Juvenile Cadet Corps had its own president, its own vice president, its own secretary, its own treasurer, and the records of the Juvenile Cadet Corps, for example, many of those records are actually at the Schomburg Library in New York. There are some that are housed in Jamaica still. But what is interesting in that, in terms of education, everything that students were not necessarily getting in school, they found a way of fashioning it into the curriculum for the Juvenile Cadet Corps. They were taking young people to the bank and teaching them how to write a check, how to reconcile their accounts, how to save money, how to plan and strategize to buy buildings. As strange as it may seem, they actually took 14 and 15-year-olds to the bank to learn how to file an application for a loan for a mortgage at one point. Additionally, the efficient womanhood activist strategy included self, peer, and intergenerational mentoring. And basically it meant that women would serve as mirrors to one another in the organization and also outside of the organization. They also deliberately went about mentoring younger women and men, again, as a part of their way of ensuring the longevity of the organization and ensuring that there was a curriculum or a form of education that went beyond what they were getting in or afforded by their public school systems, which really did not at the time take any interest in developing their identity or their sense of personhood. The Universal Negro Improvement Association eventually actually establishes a school of its own called Liberty University. It was located in Virginia. They actually bought what was formerly Smallwood Quarry Baptist College, and for 2 years they ran a all-age school similar to what we see in the Caribbean. They managed to graduate 2 sets of classes. One of the graduates was Bernicia Demina, who was the daughter of Madam Mamie Demina Aiken, who was someone that had a very vibrant presence in Jamaican politics during the 1940s. Sorry. Now, where do we find this efficient womanhood and how is it developed? I point people to the Negro World newspaper. Often, many scholars mistakenly assume or have labeled mistakenly the Negro World as Marcus Garvey's mouthpiece. And the paper initially started in 1918 and circulated until 1933, was banned by the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch governments. It sold for 5 cents in New York, 7 cents outside of New York, and 10 cents internationally. On average, the paper had between 10 to 12 pages. So the question becomes, what is on the 10 to 12 pages of the Negro World that has garnered it a global circulation, a circulation that allows it to actually generate an income to sustain itself into the Great Depression, a circulation that has made imperial governments uncomfortable, and also drawn the attention at the time of J. Edgar Hoover in the United States and the Bureau of Investigations. The newspaper, on the pages after page 1, included a set of sections: the People's Forum, the News and Views of the UNIA divisions, Kitty Corner, the Spanish section. There was also a French and Dutch section that was short-lived, weekly health talks, and the weekly magazine and feature section. And there was also a section called Poetry for the People, which we'll discuss shortly. Why I bring these sections up is simple. In these sections, we find that women and men are writing into the newspaper and recording not only their opinions and ideas, but in particular in the News and Views of the UNIA divisions, they are documenting what occurs at their local meetings. In so doing, they sort of create this conversation space where they are teaching each other strategy and pragmatism. Additionally, in these conversation spaces, they begin to credentialize the work that they do. Now, what does that mean? Many of the Division News and Views submissions come from women, and they don't sign as recording secretary or secretary. They actually sign their name, and under their names, they write reporter. They acknowledge that they are actually giving the news, the real news that you cannot see in mainstream newspapers or other Black newspapers of the period. In doing that, they sort of give themselves a level of status and credentialize the kind of historical work that they are undertaking. What is also interesting in the News and Views of the UNIA divisions is that many of the reporters tell of the newspaper being read at the start of every meeting. This is particularly impressive because many scholars assume that it's, working class, barely literate people who would belong to the UNIA, folks who don't really have high education level or aspirations. But then, I look at a newspaper that circulated for over 15 years. And I said, well, it's got to be something more than just your average Joe who is reading and buying the newspaper. And so the newspaper itself becomes another form of teaching curriculum for the membership of the UNIA. Their weekly health talks and the contributions of the Black Cross nurses, for example, that give columns dedicated to taking care of babies, taking care of the home, and they even address postpartum depression and call it "What Should Men Do When Mommy is Sad" is actually the title of the article. At the time, they didn't necessarily have the language or the term postpartum, but they knew that there was a mommy sadness, and they attempted to address it in print. So they begin to give a sort of medical manual through the Negro World newspaper. This is particularly important for us to recognize and salute because at the time in the 1920s, on average, nursing schools would admit maybe one Black person, one Jewish person. And they weren't necessarily graduating the one Black person and the one Jewish person. They would admit them, but they wouldn't necessarily survive the course. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, through the Black Cross nurses, establishes a nursing training program under the auspices of several Black doctors, including Dr. J.J. Peters of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It became an 18-month course through which women could become certificated, diplomed nurses, and then go and do practicums in hospitals like Harlem Hospital in New York City. This then got them recognition by state and county entities. Again, attempting to get credit for the work that they do, but also creating a space that capitalized on what people knew or what they were already doing in their home spaces and helping them to build on that to expand and sort of formalize or professionalize the work that they were doing. Similarly, the People's Forum allowed persons to write in and editorialize on many of the happenings of the day. The same could be said for the weekly magazine section and Kitty Corner. Kitty Corner was a space where young people were encouraged to write in and provide poetry, short essays. There were a lot of dad jokes in the Kitty Corner section. But ultimately, what Kitty Corner did was allow young people to see themselves in print and encourage them to develop their intellectual talents as well as their creative talents. Now, how did I come to this efficient womanhood? And, was it something that was just straightforward and easy and sort of benign and the saliency of women in the organization just taken, on the surface? It was not. In actuality, I come to really want to know more about the women of the Universal Negro Improvement Association upon reading a article in the New York Times that informed of the assassination of Princess Laura Adequor Kofi in March of 1928 during a UNIA meeting in Coral Gables, Florida. Princess Kofi was shot from 12 feet away, dead center in her forehead, and fell back when she first approached the podium in the Masonic Hall on that evening. There were 3 men who were arrested for her murder. One of them was actually beaten to death at the time of the incident. 2 actually stood trial and subsequently were acquitted. And there has been no investigation. We are now approaching almost 100 years later into the death of Laura Kofi. Now, for me, the question was very obvious because I actually had never thought that women could be assassinated or murdered in social justice movements. I actually, bought into it's Malcolm, it's Martin, it's Mandela in jail, it's Patrice Lumumba, it's Walter Rodney, it's Maurice Bishop, but women, no, nobody actually goes after women, right? But in actuality, they did. And Laura Kofi was silenced in large part because she presented herself at a time when Marcus Garvey had been in prison and was facing deportation. She presented herself as someone who was going to give an alternative plan to the Back to Africa movement that Garvey and others had been advocating quite vehemently for some time. Laura Kofi argued that in order to go back to Africa, that we shouldn't go to Liberia, that we should go to the interior of Africa and build up for ourselves. Now, Laura Kofi wasn't the first person to be silenced or erased, so to speak, from the story of the UNIA. In fact, that erasure began with Amy Ashwood Garvey. Upon her divorce from Mr. Garvey, we find that she no longer is mentioned in the Negro world, and many scholars forget that she even existed when they are telling the story of the organization. Yet, Amy Ashwood Garvey maintained a very Pan-Africanist perspective and lifestyle even after her separation from Marcus Garvey. She first goes to Canada, and then from Canada she goes to London, England. While she's in London, England, she establishes a restaurant called the Florence Mills, which was named after a famed African-American dancer. At the Florence Mills, she creates sort of a hub space for Caribbean and African students as well as Pan-African intellectuals. Here she is at a UNIA meeting in England. The person sitting behind her, the gentleman sitting behind her, is actually the future president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. Now, Amy Ashwood befriends some of Garvey's detractors, including W.E.B. Du Bois. She, for her own part, continued to pursue the autonomous aims of the UNIA throughout her life. Here she is in Trafalgar Square at the 5th Pan-Africanist Conference, and in that moment she says publicly, "No race has been so noble and forgiving, but now the hour has struck for our complete emancipation." She was very much so inclined to believe in the independence of African nations. She did not believe in the altruistic Africa that Garvey believed in, and she oftentimes attempted to correct him. Part of her contribution to the Pan-Africanist cause is recognized by the West African Student Union and Olida Solanke, who dubbed her or named her Adiola, which means mother of the outside. And her role as mother of the outside is really captured in her relationship with George Padmore, C.L.R. James, Ras McCunnin, Jomo Kenyatta, and Ita Wallace Johnson, who she worked with to form the International African Friends of Abyssinia in response to the crises faced by His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I during the Italo-Ethiopian conflict. In 1937, they reformed the International African Friends of Abyssinia into the International African Service Bureau and became a sort of foundation space for independence movements on the continent. They also established a journal called the International African Opinion. Now, the tenuous relationship between Marcus Garvey and Mrs. Ashwood Garvey sort of becomes the script for how women in the organization and Mr. Garvey, by and large, interact with each other. The first public signs of the delicate relationship women had with the UNIA and Garvey himself, in fact, comes during his trial in 1923. for mail fraud. The initial complaint filed against Mr. Garvey by the district attorney's office received its, let's call it icing on the cake, or its gas, as we would say, in the form of a formal complaint by Mrs. Dorothy Lawson, a New York City entrepreneurial dressmaker who bought $100 worth of stock in 1919 and traveled to Cuba to investigate commercial trade possibilities. Mrs. Lawson's complaint was accompanied by the testimony for the record by Mrs. Addie A. Still of Philadelphia, who bought 3 shares of stock in the Black Star Line, totaling $15. Annie Carrington, who worked as a finisher and paid dues to the New York UNIA after having bought $55 worth of shares in the Black Star Line while living in Trinidad, and Mrs. R. Stewart. In keeping with the mentor model of efficient womanhood, Miss Still encouraged her niece to also purchase stock totaling $15. Collectively, their family invested a total of $30 in the Black Star Line. The Black Star Line being the premier entrepreneurial project of the 1920s and 30s, was a shipping and trading navigation company that the UNIA started in response to the second class or Jim Crow status Black people received when they attempted to sail or travel. And the only class of ticket that Black people were allowed to buy was steerage. And so by owning ships, you could decide where you wanted to travel as well as how you wanted to travel. The 4 women were amongst the 22 prosecution witnesses who alleged that they bought stock believing that there would be significant monetary returns. They all realized that they were not going to see those returns. When questioned on the stand, Annie Carrington is asked, "Are you still a member of the UNIA?" To which she replied, "Yes." The next question asked was, "Why?" Here you are in court suing Mr. Garvey and the organization for money that you say you should be refunded for a project that you believe he never actually intended to achieve. To which she responded, "The Black Star Line was an investment, but the UNIA is for life." In that moment, it was made clear that while women and others in the organization did not always see eye to eye with Mr. Garvey, the individual, the aims and objectives and the goals of the organization were of such importance to them that they would continue to pursue the aims of the organization despite their disagreement with Mr. Garvey. There were others who proclaimed, for example, in the Negro world, a Mrs. Davidson of New Orleans decided to let the public know that the UNIA and Black people had not asked white people to help them do anything, that the money invested in the Black Star Line was actually their money to invest. And so if they wanted to give Mr. Garvey their money and Mr. Garvey wasted, then that is damn Black people's business alone. And so we find that regardless of the ways in which the larger media or the larger public attempt to portray Mr. Garvey, the members of the organization, particularly these women that I study, find that the ideas and philosophy of the organization is so much so important that they're willing to pursue it, whether Mr. Garvey is a part of the equation or not. Case in point, we have Mrs. Ashwood Garvey at the Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945. And at that Pan-Africanist conference, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see a sign that says, "Arabs and Jews unite against British imperialism." Part of the UNIA's efficient womanhood strategy was to partner with like-minded people. And so in this case, religious origin or color was not necessarily an issue. What was important was the common cause of ending imperialism and putting Great Britain in its place. Here we have a photo of the membership of the Negro World, and in the front of the UNIA on the steps of the Negro World newspaper in Harlem. And in the front here, we have Miss Ethel Collins. And what I want us to look at in this picture is that you see that the women and men are actually standing together on the steps, and that women are standing side by side with men, that there is no hierarchy between the men and the women in this photo where women stand at the bottom, men stand at the top. Women are also standing regaled. It's very important for us to recognize that this idea of partnership and leadership, joint co-leadership that is built into the Constitution and the fabric of the organization is epitomized in the photographs. It's epitomized in the Negro World newspaper itself, and it's epitomized on the floor of the meeting, the cover of my book. This picture was taken by James Van Der Zee in 1926. And if you look at the picture closely, you see that the Black Cross nurses are dressed in white in the back. But in the front, you have everyday women and men standing, looking at the camera. And if you notice, there are actually more women than men in this photo. But what is particularly important, or what struck me about this photo, in addition to the fact that there are actually young people in the photo, is that the regular everyday membership is at the front of the picture. The regaled membership, the members of the Universal African Motor Corps, are in the back. The Black Cross nurses are in the back. But the general body membership, the everyday people, the persons who are actually sowing the seeds that are keeping the organization going, that are believing in the philosophies of the UNIA, are standing at the front. And to me, this epitomizes what the efficient womanhood of the organization was about. The belief that regardless of your socioeconomic background, you had something to contribute to the progress of the race, and that you had the right to participate in shaping the identity and the scope of what this particular quote unquote government in exile, this nation in exile, was going to look like. Now, many scholars spend a lot of time documenting and exploring the life of Amy Jakes Garvey, Mr. Garvey's second wife. And if anyone ever tells you that Marcus Garvey was not an intelligent man, I want you to let them know that by no means was he a slow person. This gentleman married two women named Amy. I don't think that anybody could ever say that he wasn't smart. He made sure that he would never call the wrong name at the wrong time of day. The first wife is named Amy. The second wife is named Amy. All should be well in his house at all times. Now, Amy Jakes Garvey was the editor of the section called Our Women and What They Think. She also served as associate editor of the Negro World newspaper. I call her Garvey's chronicler. While Mr. Garvey was in prison, she compiled his speeches in Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, Volume 1. There was also Volume 2, and there is a third volume. Now, because I read the Negro World as though it is like chapter and verse type Bible, I always go back to look to see if the speeches and the essays that are in Philosophy and Opinions actually appear in the Negro World newspaper. As in particular because Miss Jakes Garvey claimed that the Philosophy and Opinions was simply a compiling of what Mr. Garvey had to say at different points. Some of what is in Philosophy and Opinions does coincide with what is in the Negro World. However, I do feel that there are portions of Philosophy and Opinions where we are reading the actual words and thinking of Amy Jakes Garvey more so than that of Marcus Garvey. Amy Jakes Garvey befriended W.E.B. Du Bois. She also befriended a gentleman named Theodore Bilbo and Ernest Server Cox. Ernest Server Cox and Theodore Bilbo put a bill before the United States Senate that was known as the Back to Africa Bill in an attempt to reinvigorate the UNIA's repatriation to Africa scheme in the 1930s. It was unsuccessful. Now, the section Our Women and What They Think was literally that. Mrs. Garvey actually invited women from across the globe to write into the newspaper about their lives, about their concerns, and give their opinions on various topics. And so what I've screenshot here from the newspaper is an actual appeal along with the address for where she wanted the correspondences sent. And so Our Women and What They Think. Now, many people have asked me this question. So was it about housekeeping? Was it about, how to love your husband, how to raise your children? In actuality, I learned more global history reading Our Women and What They Think than I had actually learned in school. The Our Women and What They Think section of the paper was very internationalist in its focus. They were concerned with, for example, here's one clip, and we're for a national urge. Some of the handicaps of the Negro businessman. The idea of Our Women and What They Think was to cover the vast scope of what issues women face on a daily basis, but also for them to talk about on paper, in print, how they viewed the Black world, the Black global world, and their vision of an independent Black nation. And so there are sections, there are weeks where they're talking about the Riffian War and the Muslim Turks. There are weeks when they're talking about the crisis in Egypt. There are times when they are comparing and contrasting the development of Japan and China and how they have managed to sort of buttress themselves against Western interventions. And then there are moments when they are criticizing, for example, the then president of Turkey because he forgot to give his wife a Valentine's gift. And there's a whole article on why men should honor their wives. Now, Our Women and What They Think is essential in this, that it helps us understand this global conversation or the seeds of a global conversation and that occurs in the Negro world. Now, I call this global conversation diasporic backchat. And full disclosure, my parents are Jamaican. And so every time I got ready to challenge my mother, she would allow me 2 rounds. And on the 3rd round, she would declare that if I backchat her one more time, that this conversation was not going to go good for me and I needed to quit while I was ahead. And so I used the term as a way of documenting what I started to see a pattern of in the Negro world, where poets in particular were signaling and talking to one another. One such poet was Ethel True Dunlap, who was the most prolific of the Negro world poets. And I have a poem from her here, I Am White by Color Only. And her partner, so to speak, in crime here, was H. Elizabeth Dowden of Hartford, Connecticut, who also wrote in response to Ethel Dunlap's poetry. There was also J.R. Casimir and J.R. Casimir of Dominican Republic, Charles Estes of Canada, and others who sort of kept up this dialogue where one poet would write, for example, Elizabeth Dowden writes about race consciousness, and then 2 weeks later, I would see 2 or 3 other poems with the same title or similar themes. And I realized that they were actually developing a conversation amongst each other in print that helped shape the way the public and readers would understand Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. Now, Ethel True Dunlap is an interesting figure. This is the only known picture of Miss Dunlap, and it was taken especially for the Negro world. in 1921. Ethel True Dunlap actually turns out to be a white woman born in Missouri who joins the UNIA in Chicago, and then moves to Los Angeles and finds herself living in a white community in Los Angeles. When she's living in Chicago, she's living amongst Black people. Now, initially, I'm just going to be very honest with you. I started transcribing all the poems I could find in the Negro world and trying to put them into categories in order to write about them and do research on the different women and men that I found. Ethel True Dunlap has 66 poems published in the Negro world. She also published poetry in a Buddhist journal called The Young East, and she published in several other magazines sporadically. But here is Ethel Dunlap telling me, I am white by color only, if color means that I take part with those who lynch and burn and pass a Black man by. And I couldn't figure out initially, maybe she was mixed race, because there's a lot of that in America. I'm looking her up. I'm looking up in the national records. I'm looking at her death certificate. Ethel Dunlap tragically commits suicide. And then I read To the Sons and Daughters of Ethiopia for like the 20th time and realize that Ethel Dunlap was actually engaging in a call and response method with the poets of the Negro world. Write to me, O sons and daughters of a race that is oppressed, for your letters thrill my spirit, through your messages I am blessed. Write and tell me of your sorrows, write and tell me of your woes. How is Georgia, Alabama? Write from me where Miami flows. Write to me o'er the ocean. And so she's actually asking Black poets to write to her, and then she responds. And this is what builds this diasporic conversation on the pages of the Negro world. So even in this moment of her own discomfort and her own sort of conflict with who she is in the world and what her allyship, what her responsibility is, what her partnership with the UNIA should look like, she is also helping to shape and define and present a form of teaching tool for the Negro world audience. Now, in terms of mentoring and partnering, we have one of the more better known or well-known persons affiliated with the organization, Lady Henrietta Vinton Davis, who was given the title Lady of the Race by Marcus Garvey. And what is interesting about Lady Davis, and this gets to the efficient womanhood mentoring, peer mentoring, and sort of collective individual bridge builder concept, Henrietta Vinton Davis joins the organization when she's 56 years old. She's a trained Shakespearean actress. She is the mentee of Frederick Douglass. She lives in Washington, D.C. She's the recorder of deeds. She comes from an affluent family. Her stepfather is an AME minister. Her godfather happens to be Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. And yet she decides that she wants to align herself with the Universal Negro Improvement Association rather than with other organizations like the Black Women's Club movement or the NAACP. She becomes the first elected female officer of the organization. She's appointed second vice president of the Black Star Line. She is one of the UNIA delegates to Liberia when the organization is attempting to establish a colony there, and she's the co-author of the Negro Social Policy. She also works as the organization's international organizer. And why the partnership of Henrietta Vinton Davis is especially important is that Henrietta Vinton Davis actually signs more Black Star Line stock certificates than Marcus Garvey ever did. People actually galvanized towards or were drawn to Henrietta Vinton Davis. One, because she was already an established person, an actress. Two, she was a senior person in the space of, on average, the age of a UNIA member was 28. So she appeared to be someone who was senior, had wisdom, was well informed, and then she came from this very middle class, affluent, intellectually well-known background that gave her sort of an audience or sort of an access pass to people. One of the reasons that she doesn't, according to her, she doesn't join the Black Women's Club movement or other organizations was that she had a penchant for the love of self. The colorism that plagued many of the organizations of the 1920s and 30s was something that Henrietta Vinton Davis detested. The celebration of Blackness and the awareness of self and the comfort level of that awareness in the UNIA is what she found most appealing. Now, Henrietta Vinton Davis was supported in her idea of a celebration of Blackness by Princess Laura Adequor Kofi. She migrated to the United States from Ghana, West Africa. She established the Universal African Church, which is still in existence today and has been marked as a Florida historic site in Jacksonville, Florida. She signed up approximately 3,000 members for the organization in less than 3 months. And as I mentioned, she was murdered at a Miami UNIA meeting March 3rd, 1928. Laura Kofi presented some problems for the male leadership of the UNIA. One for Mr. Garvey as he was in jail and subsequently was deported. Her rise to fame, her popularity threatened in his mind, right? His ability to hold on to leadership, although his leadership was being questioned and attacked by other men, he actually singles out Laura Kofi. Ministers, preachers were also very uncomfortable with Laura Adequor Kofi. She establishes the African Universal Church, and she does this in a very unique way. Many of the UNIA meetings actually occurred after church. One of the auxiliaries that women belonged to in the UNIA was the Universal African Motor Corps, which was an all-female paramilitary group. They taught women how to shoot, how to fix cars, how to do bandages, etc. They were ready to fight the war to defend the nation in exile, the government in exile. So Laura Kofi said, wait a minute, you're on the church choir on Sunday morning and you're singing about let us all gather together in the name of Jesus. And then at the end of the service, you go outside on the lawn, in the parking lot, etc., to go practice how to send people to see and meet Jesus. The two things don't go together. You can't do both at the same time. It has to be one or the other. So she was very much so, let us separate our religious identity and our religious practice, and when we are doing those things, from when we are taking on the practical politics and the leadership roles that we aspire to have in the organization. Her pull for people also resulted in the loss of money in the offering plate for many ministers, and this made them uncomfortable. And I explore this more in the text as well. She was arrested several times and managed to never be actually charged with anything. She was acquitted in court twice, and mainly she was arrested for unlawful assembly, because when she started speaking, people would just gather. Now, Laura Kofi, much like Amy Ashwood, becomes persona non grata, and their advertisements in the Negro world telling people that she's a charlatan, don't give her any money, don't follow her, she's not supposed to be organizing on our part. And they even go as far as to say, well, she's not really from West Africa, she's from somewhere in Georgia. Her name is not really Laura Kofi, her name is something else. And of course, there are scholars who argue with me all day long about whether or not she was a true African, or if she was from somewhere else, or if she was from Georgia or somewhere in the American South. And I'm amazed by it, because I keep saying to them, does it matter where she was from? Can we talk about the fact that they assassinated a woman in broad daylight and nobody has ever gone to jail or been held accountable for that assassination? Can we talk about what happened to Laura Kofi? Is that not the real story here? And for me, it is, because it indicates the level of potency that she as a woman and other women had in the organization that would cause that kind of extreme response. Here we have an advertisement for the legal defense of Claude Green and J.B. Nemo. The organization wanted to raise $1,000 in defense of the two men. They were able to raise the money and they were given legal counsel, which resulted in their acquittal. Here we have the sepulcher final resting place of Laura Kofi, which I mentioned is on the Florida Historical Trail. And this brings us to the refiners of the UNIA. After Laura Kofi's assassination, Madam Mimi Demina Aiken, who is known in some of the circles in Kingston as a member of the early movement for independence and participation in political parties with Amy Bailey and Mary Nibbs, became officer in charge of the American field for the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And Mamie Demean is a very interesting person, and she sort of epitomizes efficient womanhood. She was married to a Nicaraguan. She's originally from Bluefield, Louisiana. And she married a Nicaraguan, and at the time when you married a person, your citizenship became the citizenship of the person that you married. It's not as it is now. Back then, it was a little bit different. And so many people thought that she was actually a Nicaraguan, that she was Spanish. She met Henrietta Vinton Davis while Henrietta Vinton Davis was touring Latin America. She decided she needed to fire her husband, Frank Demina. And so the best way for her to do that was to become a translator in the UNIA. She became Henrietta Vinton Davis's translator and traveled South America with her and eventually ends up in New York with her daughter, Bernice Demina, who was actually a graduate of Liberty University and was the person who took over Our Women and What They Think when Amy Jakes Garvey stopped contributing to the women's page. And Bernice Demina's column was called Womanly Ways. She was also the editor of the Kitty Corner column. Now, Mamie Demina is interesting in that she had multiple passports. And she would use her Spanish passport, her British passport, intermittently. One, to confuse things, of course, but two, because she was already known to the British government and to the American government as a member of the organization. And so she wanted to be able to sort of move undercover in order to continue to do the kind of organizing work that the UNIA called for. She was also editor of the Negro World for a period, and when the newspaper collapsed, finally she launched her own newspaper called the Ethiopian World. In this newspaper, she actually runs articles from the Pullman Porters organization and A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was the signer of the Garvey Must Go campaign and very much so anti-Garvey. Yet in the efficient womanhood strategy framework, recognizing that the Pullman Porters, which was the first Black union, labor union in the United States, presented a ripe and ready audience that would help to rebuild or sustain the UNIA, she finds a space in her newspaper for them to begin to contribute weekly editorials. She also befriended W.E.B. Du Bois, and she found herself living in Jamaica as a naturalized Jamaican citizen after falling in love with a gentleman, Mr. Aiken, who was a realtor and a owner of several bakeries. She then becomes a part of the St. Andrews Kingston Corporation. And in that space, she launches a women's home and a girls' school that essentially provided an alternate space for women who needed to leave their homes because they were either pregnant or in abusive relationships. She also opened a beauty college in St. Anne as a way of helping people to get training toward employment. Now, she does all of this in Jamaica based on her cachet in the UNIA. her fame in the United States is what garnered her acceptance in Jamaican communities and with Jamaican businessmen and Jamaican social concerned groups. Now, the UNIA in itself also becomes the space where women like Mamie Demeanor can reinvent themselves. And one reinventor is Isabella Lawrence. Isabella Lawrence was the co-founder of the Black Cross Nurses, which was established in 1920. And when the organization began to go through changes, she saw that there were other possibilities for Black women. And as a result, in keeping with the idea of an exchange of goods, ideas, and products with the African continent, she decides that she wants to be the first and the real Rihanna Fenty by exporting products from Africa to be used to make cosmetics for Black women. So no more bleaching cream. Okay. The idea here was that you would use natural minerals to help bolster your complexion and take better care of your skin. It was also a means of providing employment for Black women. Isabella Lawrence was born in Trinidad and became a trained diplomed nurse in Belize. She left Belize and went to New York, where she joined the UNIA's hierarchy when she established the Black Cross Nurses during the 1920 convention. She was also very much so a part of this writing, this diasporic backchat conversation, global conversation that took place on the pages of the Negro World. And here we have two excerpts where she's given a report on the auxiliaries of the New York Local, and then we also see her questioning the role and the purpose of Black preachers. Now, the Universal African Motor Corps, many people have asked me, well, how long did it last and was it real? Here's a picture of Ruth Smith, who was actually the driver for Mamie Demeanor. And if you look closely here, she has it sort of tucked in. She's kind of hiding it. That's her gun holster. This is her actual uniform. This is one of the last pictures that she took. This was in the 1980s. Miss Smith was very much so proud of her work in the UNIA and active in the UNIA in Philadelphia until the time of her death. She, as a member of the Universal African Motor Corps, along with the women who belonged to the Black Cross Nurses, and this is a photo of the Black Cross Nurses from Danville, Indiana, in 1921, attempted to fill gaps in their communities in ways that allowed Black people access to resources when governments, churches, fraternal organizations, and philanthropic organizations didn't necessarily meet the need. The significance of the Black Cross Nurses is not only that they provided medical care in Black communities that wouldn't have otherwise had access, and that they blended homeopathic or traditional practices with Western medicine. What is also significant about the Black Cross Nurses is that they contributed to what I consider to be the crowning achievement of the UNIA. They changed the way Black people saw and thought and felt about themselves during one of the most complicated and harrowing periods in global history. It wasn't just a rough time in America or Great Britain, but it was a rough time across the board. Having a Black Cross unit in your UNIA branch or division was a way of showing how serious or how fervent you were. There were Black Cross nurse divisions in places like South Africa, Australia, Nova Scotia, Canada, throughout Great Britain, throughout the Caribbean, in the East Indies. And the Black Cross nurses, really wearing the white uniform was only part of it. They actually had two uniforms. there was a green and white uniform that they wore when they were actually working, when they were doing care work. And the white uniforms were the uniforms that they wore when they were on parade. The Universal African Motor Corps and the Black Cross nurses become these mediators between the larger world and the Black community in several ways. Not only are they attempting to point to the ways in which Black women can professionalize the work that they do, but then they also create a space where Black women can ascribe a standing for themselves independent of other sources or having to be sanctioned by other individuals. Now, being a bridge builder and a mediator takes on different forms. Here we have Amina Fahy. Miss Fahy was a UNIA member in Harlem. She was originally from the Virgin Islands, or St. Thomas to be exact. And when Mr. Garvey went to England, he's writing back to various members and letting them know that he's reincorporating the organization and he needs their help. And I thought it was strange that he was writing letters to these women, you know, telling them if they could help to organize or they could send a contribution or they could buy the Black Man magazine to kind of help circulation. But then I found that in the Pittsburgh Courier, they did an interview with Mr. Garvey and they asked him about this. And his response was very simple. He reached out to women because he never had any trouble with the women. He never had to worry about the women, that he could actually trust the women. He could not say the same for the men. Mr. Garvey was very much so aware that there were men in his midst, men who he had mistakenly trusted, that had not served the organization or Mr. Garvey himself well. That brings me to Miss Ethel Collins of Brownstown, St. Anne, Jamaica. Miss Collins, who, as you can see here, she is labeled reporter and executive secretary of the Garvey Club. She establishes the Garvey Club as a means of ensuring that younger people who join the organization have an opportunity to know about Mr. Garvey and the history of the UNIA. She also is the founder of the UNIA's Juvenile Cadet Corps. Now here we have a picture of a UNIA meeting in Los Angeles, California. And I sort of tried to blow out the picture a little bit to show us the young people sitting at the front of the room, flanked by the Black Cross nurses and the Universal African Motor Corps. The Juvenile Cadet Corps of the UNIA was specifically designated as a means to, one, making sure that mothers who had to work on Saturdays had somewhere safe and protected for their children to be. Two, that those children were being given an opportunity to be educated beyond the ways in which Western education deemed fit for them. And this was actually a part of the aims and the goals of the organization laid out by Amy Ashwood and Marcus Garvey in 1914. There's a specific line that says that the curriculum for boys and girls should be the same. So if a girl wanted to be an architect, she was going to be given the same opportunity as a boy, the same kind of education. And vice versa, if a boy wanted to be a tailor or learn how to build clothes, that he would be given the same opportunity as a girl wanting to do the same thing. And in this way, she's bridge building and peer mentoring in line with the efficient womanhood activist strategy. Lastly, in terms of talking about bridge builders and mediators, I want to sort of call our attention to Clara Morgan and the Universal African Cross Nurses Child Welfare Department, where they're laying out the best ways for children to be cared for spiritually and physically. And the Black Crosses are celebrated in poetry by Rosalia Pfeiffer, who was the wife, she was from the Dutch West Indies, and she was the wife of famed dancer and choreographer from West Africa, Assata Dufour, who was a mentee of Alvin Haley. And if you notice underneath Rosalie Pfeiffer's name here, she has put her address. What is unique in particular about the women and the men of the UNIA, and I say this about the women in particular especially, is that when they contributed poetry or when they wrote editorials, they put their address after their name. And they did this knowing well and good that the organization was being surveilled by several governments, that the newspaper had been banned by imperial governments, but they took that risk anyway. That risk was sort of capstoned for me in an event that occurred in 1923 when the Voluntary Committee of New Orleans Division number 149 wrote a letter to the mayor of New Orleans. At the time, a gentleman named Mr. Esau had been murdered by other Garveyites. There were several reasons given for why he was murdered, one of which was that he was busy collecting funds for the organization in somebody else's bed. That the husband came home and found the wife giving her donation to the organization lying in bed with Mr. Esau, and didn't think that that was a progressive way for the race to be built. So he loses his life, and the husband and some other men are arrested. At the time, the New Orleans division happens to be one of the largest UNIA divisions. And so the mayor decides to make this a moment where he's going to curtail the activities of the New Orleans division. So he decides to issue an edict to say that they don't have the right to assemble, that he's banning them from meeting, and should they meet, everybody's going to be arrested. Well, the Voluntary Committee of New Orleans Division number 149, Mrs. G.D. Davis, RN, Miss Octavia Franklin, Miss Essie Holloway, RN, and Miss Florence Waterhouse disagreed with the mayor. They decided to write a public letter and have it circulated in the Times-Picayune, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, and the Negro World. And in that letter, they simply let the mayor know that they will be meeting and that they invite him, the sheriff, and the governor to come to the meeting because there was business at hand that needed to be taken care of, and there had never been any incident during, before, or after any of the UNIA meetings. Now, something might have happened down the street, around the way, whatever, but that didn't have anything to do with the business of the UNIA, which they intended to carry out. Now, I was perplexed by the Voluntary Committee of New Orleans because when I came upon this letter, I couldn't figure out where else did the Voluntary Committee exist? Was this a legitimate auxiliary of the organization? How did they come to be? Who voted them in? Who decided that they should be the committee? And then I realized that these women just simply made up a title, wrote a letter, signed their names, and decided to be bold. And this is what we find with the UNIA women. They practice what we call the exigencies of leadership, that their efficient womanhood strategies called on them to find ways to mediate the gender concerns and the nationalist concerns simultaneously. They knew that Black men were now going to be targeted and that they were in danger more so than before because the mayor was calling attention to the fact that it was Garveyites who were causing trouble in the city and Garveyites who were killing each other. So Garveyites needed to be checked and surveilled. So it couldn't be that a Black man would write a letter in protest. So these women write the letter in defense of themselves, in defense of the organization, in defense of the bodies of other Black men, and they essentially live out the efficient womanhood definition established by Hannah Nichols when she says, there will be no dormant spaces and we will accept no objection from anyone. And so this evening, I would like to thank you for having me, especially on today, and for the indulgence of getting to choose today. Today is my mother's birthday, and she left me 13 years ago. And so this evening, I celebrate her, Mrs. Sybil Joyce Anderson Duncan of Kellett's, Clarendon, Jamaica, a graduate of Shortwood Teachers College. It has been my privilege to spend time with you this evening. I look forward to any questions or comments that you may have. I also want to call your attention to organizations that help to continue the work of the UNIA and ACL. As many of you know, the UNIA is very much so alive and vibrant today. And in honor of Black History Month, I call your attention to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALA, the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, ASWAD, the Caribbean Studies Association, and the Association of Caribbean Historians, who over the past 27 years have helped encourage, guide, and critique the work that I share with you this evening. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Duncan. We have run a bit over time.
I'm sorry, sir.
But I think it would be, we have to at least allow a few questions if there are any from the floor. And I see a hand up. Rastan, is that for the extension? Tell me just that first, if that is it.
So both. I move for the extension.
Second it.
Okay, seconded by DP Earl. Okay. I want to ask a quick question, Dr. Duncan. This kind of, where were the, I noticed a lot of the people, obviously, because Garvey Wave was from Jamaica. I don't know, but you mentioned a lot of people who were of Caribbean origin. Were there women who got involved? I mean, I know there must have been some, but in terms of the leadership, who were American born? And I'm asking the question because I'm wondering, I see how the women in the Democratic Party have kind of been the real backbone of the party, Black women. And I'm just wondering if there is a connection.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, indeed. Hannah Nichols was a native of New Jersey. You have from Cleveland, Ohio, you have a set of women who actually start a conversation on the pages of the Negro World called I'm a Live Wire for the Garvey Movement. They become defenders of Marcus Garvey from the American West, from the American South, in large part because they find that the voice that they are allowed to have or that they can have in the UNIA is a voice that they have not had the opportunity to express in other spaces. So, for example, Lavinia Smith, there was an article that ran in a Buffalo newspaper. Lavinia Smith is in Cleveland, Ohio. Buffalo, New York, Carrie Ledette, who is one of the first African-American women to play basketball in the United States, is also a member of the UNIA and becomes Marcus Garvey's secretary. Carrie Ledette exposes a Buffalo newspaper that criticizes Mr. Garvey. Miss Smith in Cleveland, Ohio, decides that she needs to address the Buffalo newspaper. She don't even live in New York, but she wants them to know that they cannot speak ill of Mr. Garvey and why they cannot speak ill of Mr. Garvey. And so there is a strain of feminist politics that is actually born on the floor of the UNIA, and it grows and is nurtured through the efficient womanhood activist strategy. So you find many women in the United States who find a place, and there's two types of leadership in the organization. You have your elected hierarchical officials, and then on the ground, people like Ethel True Dunlap, who become the leader because the people decide that that's who they want to lead. And it's not because she's voted into office. It's not because she has a title. It's because she reflects something that those persons see as a necessity, and they respond to that. And so they deem her their central figure. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. If anybody has, maybe we can take about two or so. Rasta, you had a question, okay?
Yes, well, first, pardon me for not giving you a full title at the start of the meeting, Dr. NATANYA. In my mind, I see Marcus Garvey, our national hero, as a forerunner of many persons. I think his work facilitated Rosa Parks on the bus. I think It has something to do with Martin Luther King and his dream. And so last year we saw where President Biden finally relented and pardoned Marcus Garvey. Is the UNIA satisfied, or shouldn't we be looking for full exoneration?
I cannot speak for the UNIA. I will speak for Dr. Duncan and tell you that yes, full exoneration should be the goal and remains the goal for those of us who truly understand what occurred. Mr. Garvey should have never been brought onto charges, as I indicated to you in my discussion and as I footnoted meticulously in my text. Henrietta Vinton Davis and others who sold more stock in the BSL and actually ran the BSL were never called into account for their role in the overselling of shares of stock. Secondly, it's important to understand that a pardon does not take away an arrest record, a conviction. All it says is that, forgive us, we're going to forgive you. But it does not hold any accountability on the part of the US government, on the part of J. Edgar Hoover. I think there needs to be a public apology and an accounting for the behavior of J. Edgar Hoover as it relates to Mr. Garvey and others. Everything that occurred to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, COINTELPRO, was first practiced and perfected on the UNIA and Marcus Garvey. Henrietta Vinton Davis was labeled in FBI records as the most dangerous Negro woman in 1922. There is no way for us to get away from the fact that race and the threat of a informed and empowered nation of Black people was really what was at stake. And honestly speaking, had we paid attention to some of the lessons of the UNIA, we would not be crying about who got fired from what news station last night. We wouldn't be bothered that Target doesn't have a DEI program, because we would have established spaces for ourselves that we use to script our own image and discuss life and have venues as alternatives to what the larger world has to offer. But we didn't follow that lesson. We went mainstream and got comfortable. And as they say, you slip, you slide.
Yep.
Okay. One more. Is there one more?
I didn't have up my hand, but
Go ahead,
it's
Eric.
just a mere coincidence that I happened to watch the video of how Britain dismantled the West Indies Federation, and they blamed Jamaica. And the same, it seems like it was things that were set by the rulers scientifically to destroy, and they would never show us Black people respect. With all the diplomacy that is displayed, we have not tried to move the mask, and it's spreading and it will not stop. We have to face those facts. My father used to tell me things about Marcus Garvey when I was really a youngster, and I didn't understand. You listen because your father talking to you. But I regret that when I was in school 60 years ago, they did not teach anything but what the British taught us. And finally, the British even made, with our federation, they scripted what we were to do. They didn't follow what we wanted. And I believe every word that Sir Hilary Beckles said in that thing. I hope you have read it, Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any hands up, so I think we can go to, let me go to President Stephen, and then he can introduce the person who is going to do the thank you.
Okay, DP Stu, thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Duncan, for a very rich and informative presentation. But we do have a member who is going to give an official vote of thanks, and I will pass the microphone to DP Earl to speak on behalf of the club.
No, it's not DP Earl, it's Marcel, DP Marcel.
Oh, it's DP Marcel. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes, that's right. Sorry. Yes, DP Marcel. My apologies.
Okay.
President, that's okay. I am a forgiving member of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston. Like the woman we just heard of just now. Dr. Duncan, a very good evening to you. And let me start by saying we share in celebrating your mother's birthday. I think you said today is actually would have been her birthday, or is her birthday.
Today would have been her birthday, yes.
Yes. Well, we're happy to have had you on your mother's birthday, but even more so for the fascinating journey that you took us on. You know, I wish I had even half the time that you have spent with us this evening to really do justice to thanking you, because
Frozen.
It was really because you took us on a journey had before. And one of the things that came to me very early in your presentation is that the practice and what happened with early days of the UNIA way back 1920 was that they didn't have to speak about equality or getting equal opportunities. It was practiced in what was done in the UNIA, and this is one of the first things that came out and got me. But time, I know, is not enough, and I just want to say on behalf of everybody that we were very privileged this evening to have had your presentation. As I said, we had a perspective that we had not seen before, and the role and the impact and the contribution of the women of UNIA and practice as you defined it, really took us inside and basically into the guts of the UNIA in a way that we didn't before. And one of the things that was, I think, really intriguing about your presentation was the details that you gave
I think Marcel is having some problems with his streaming, with his Wi-Fi.
The nation, for instance, of Laura Kaplan, and it was done in such a manner that we felt as if we were there. Oh my! You're not hearing me?
You keep cutting out. You keep cutting out and freezing. And I'm hearing you now.
Oh yes.
But
okay.
You're freezing.
Earlier on, I did get a signal that said low bandwidth.
Oh,
so
that's the problem.
Okay, let me do this quickly. I was just saying that we're really fascinated by your presentation and the descriptive way in which you did it. You took us there. You took us in all these events that you described. One of the things that I'm happy about is that we have this recorded, because it really is a study and a history lesson that we can refer to. We're happy and glad that we were privileged to hear from you this evening. And as a memento and a token appreciation, you will see on screen now a certificate that will recognize today, the day that you shared with us, the day of your mother's birthday, and for you to have as a reminder of our appreciation for your presentation this evening. Thank you so very much.
Okay. Thank you. Back to you, President
time to be with us this evening on behalf of all of us who are here.
Thank you, DP Marcel, and thank you, Dr. Duncan, for that presentation. We're just going to move on with our program. I'm now going to ask DP Earl, I was a little bit ahead of time, who is now going to be the Sergeant at Arms to extract some fines from our Kiwanian members. DP Earl?
I wish I could do this part to really raise some funds, but I have not been apprised of how you do the collection. and that I have a beef with that.
Yes.
I owe some money, but I don't even, I mean, you don't go and put in $500 on an account just like that. So I don't think it's working. But I'm not going to waste time, and I'm just going to do a blanket fine. And all Kiwanian club members of Kingston Club are being asked to pay $300 each. Now, I have one other thing though. In future, I would like to see all the Kiwanis Club of Kingston members put KCOK beside their names. I know the old ones, and maybe it's my fault that I don't know the young ones.
You just love Casey.
Well, you see what I mean? Even when the Queen gone, everybody become Casey. But that is our...
Nothing is wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, Fortis man. Anyway, I will just share one little episode with you. I wish I could say it was me, but if I say it's me, you know how many years ago this would have had to be. Woke up a Saturday morning, and when I looked on the mirror, I saw a note stuck on, with Scotch tape, and red, shaped like lips. And the wife had left a note. Hi, honey. You can stay in bed long this morning. I'm going to get some of your favorite, and I'll be back soon. So I got up and I wondered what on earth happened. So I went downstairs, saw my son eating. I said, what happened here last night? He said, boy, you came home drunk. You knocked over the center table. You vomited. And when mom tried to pick you up, you said, get your hands off me, woman. I'm a married man. So you say, score points. Okay, that's my little story for tonight. And all Kiwanis Club of Kingston members, please pay $300 each. DLG Willie said he would make a note, and then we can organize how to collect. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarge, DP Earl. Yes, so collection can be when we meet face to face, or there's nothing that hinders our members from sending the transfer to our charity account as is needed. So please continue to donate.
That would be the admin account. That would be the admin.
Sorry,
account.
the admin. Yes, that's correct.
My admin can't be charity. Yes, you can't take it all
admin.
back.
That's right. All right. As we wind up, I'm going to ask DP Marcel to share with us quickly the thought of the week.
Yes, here we go.
To do that, I'd just like to let Raleigh know that Amelia Meeks was a member of Kiwanis Club, but the lady got so busy she didn't have time to stay, so she know all about Kiwanis. Don't mess with her.
I'm still here.
I know you are. Have a good evening.
This all for the day and for the week. When you're starting to feel anxious, always remember to embrace present moment.
After the song about your bandwidth, Marcel, you're cutting out.
Okay,
tell us which carrier you're carrying. Let us make it public. Which one you're carrying? Flow or Digicel?
I think
of both.
By the time you're finished your message, it might have been another 10 minutes. I think you better pay twice your fee here.
Hold on, President.
Yes, thank you. Quickly, it would be remiss of me to allow our secretary to give any notices. I had bypassed that, but DLG Will, is there any urgent notice that you wish to share with our members at this time?
No, just to remind the members, the most important engagement we have this week is the charter ceremony for our new KK Club and New Hope Preparatory. It's going to be held in Church Hall at the 17 North Street or 17 North Street.
Thursday at 12:30.
At 12:30.
Yes.
Apart from that, I believe that West St. Andrew and North St. Andrew may have announcements regarding their fundraising luncheons.
Okay. Okay, thank you. President Claudine, or anybody from West St. Andrew, would you like
Right
to?
here, President Stephen. Thank you
right.
so much. You're
Go
all
ahead.
invited to a fantastic family Sunday brunch on Sunday, March 9th at the Sunken Gardens, Hope Gardens. We have Nadine Sutherland as our guest performer. Gate prize is day pass for 2 at Royalton Blue Waters. Fun, games, fashion show, 11 to 3, only $7,000. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you, President Stephen.
My
Thank
birthday,
you, President Claudine.
my
Yes.
birthday with Claudine, so
I'll have the cake. Don't
All
worry.
right.
Come
There you
on
go.
out.
Yeah. Good touch. Good touch.
President Stephen.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Beth Thompson
Oh,
on
yes, hi,
behalf,
DLG Bell.
yeah,
Mhm.
on behalf of Governor Pam, and of course the planning team for the International President's visit, which ended today. We really want to thank you very much, your club and all the members who supported. It was a wonderful 4 days, and we are happy that it ended. All is well. That ends well.
That's
So
good.
thank
That's good to
you
hear.
for in whatever way you assisted, supported. We
Yes.
say thanks.
And
Thank you all.
you should be rested now.
Yes. Yeah, I will. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, DLG Bell. Is there any other club that would like to make an announcement at this time?
Good evening, President Stephen. This is
Good evening,
Director
Derek.
Crystal.
Hi, Crystal. Director Crystal, go ahead.
Hope all is well with you.
It is. It is. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, this Thursday, the Kiwanis Club of Montego Bay will be having our face-to-face meeting, and it's going to be Black History Trivia. So if you're in the Montego Bay area, please feel free to hop on over at RADA in West Green at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's Kiwanis Club of Montego Bay. Anybody who is interested or in the area, please go out and attend. Is there any other club that has an announcement at this time?
Thank you, President Stephen. This is Audrey Brown. Just to let everyone know that early bird registration closes this Sunday for the upcoming district convention. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the district convention in Niagara Falls, Canada, correct?
Correct.
All right. We should have our delegation from Kingston Club attending, so I'll ensure that everybody is registered and ready to go. Okay, any other announcements from the district or Kiwanis clubs? Last call.
President Stephen, just an observation.
Sure.
Especially when we have visitors. We speak of DT and TDT, and I am suggesting that we practice spelling out exactly what these titles are.
Okay. Okay.
Suggestion.
All right. I take it. I'll take it in stride. As District Trustee Ralston.
Well, he could put out his letters so that it would help you to remember too. He has so many.
Okay. On that note, is there any? We really want to wind up the meeting. We have run a little bit late, but we thank everybody for their patience. Is there any other announcement for Kiwanians? Going once, going twice.
Wrong.
Concluded. If not, thank you all for attending this evening. I hope that you found it helpful, informative, keeping with the spirit of Black History Month. Again, remember, we continue to have our meetings every Tuesday at 7 p.m. And we also have our meetings archived on our YouTube channel. So if you missed anything, you can always refer to that. And if there's any other business, I would like to just take this opportunity to, if you have a glass, to raise a toast to Kiwanis International and to Jamaica Land We Love.
And we love.
Cheers and good evening, everybody. This meeting is now terminated. Drive safely if you're on your way home, and if you're at home, rest soundly.